Today in the EU, how Putin's grip on the East could influence EU's enlargement package.
The biggest promoter of the enlargement policy is Putin. Had he not invaded Ukraine, I don't think when we would have seen the transfer of the neighboring and partnership to a pool, which is called the enlargement process.
Today, the European Commission unveils its 2024 enlargement package. It's a set of guidelines shaping Brussels' efforts to engage with Eastern Europe. Last year's document was unprecedented. It included a revamped accession process for Western Balkans, a pathway for Ukraine to join the Union, but Putin's grip on the region has only continued to tighten, and the EU now faces mounting pressure to quickly strengthen its enlargement policy. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. I'm joined in the studio by Teona Lavrelashvili, policy expert at the Martin Center for European Studies. Hi, Teona.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
We're more than 2 years into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the EU's response to Putin's tightening grip so far in the region has been to bolster its relationship with the neighborhood. Here I'm pointing to the enlargement talks, of course. What do you make of the success of this strategy so far?
Overall, I think that there is a big momentum on EU enlargement, and this strategy has been rather straightforward because we have seen immediate successes in the process of accession talks of Ukraine, of Moldova, but also to a certain extent on Georgia, which is, as you know, now on pause. The main transformational impact of enlargement and its strategy, I think it's its ambition to have the economic and societal transformation in these countries, because many of these countries still continue having an external interference in their domestic affairs, and we have seen also in the recent elections. And I think that in general, the EU candidate countries' population is very much pro-European, and they would like to see their own future in peaceful and economically wealthy union. That is, of course, possible, but this requires step-by-step approach and also economic reforms, but also societal understanding of the benefits and challenges accompanying to enlargement. And therefore, I think this is also one of the reasons why our study at the Martin Center also highlights the importance of the engagement of the citizens and public understanding about the EU enlargement. And I think that this is also a good move from the future designated commissioner. Well, we have to see to what extent we will have the commissioner on enlargement now next week. However, the point here is that indeed the focus of a new commissioner, I believe, should be having a clear focus on communication strategy, on discussing and understanding the benefits, but also challenges of the enlargement process.
And going back to my question, sorry for insisting, but do you think that looking back in the past year, the EU enlargement package has been successful, has not been successful, mixed results? What's your assessment of it?
The answer to your question is yes, but also no, because we need to look into different sectors and areas of success. For instance, if we discuss the public administration reform in the case of the Western Balkan countries, but also reforms in the rule of law, but also electoral integrity. For instance, in Albania, that was already some time ago that the EU succeeded in this respect. I think that there has been, of course, success stories, and we have also seen recent breakthroughs, right? So Albania, but also Montenegro, who can be, by the way, the first country that will be joining the European Union by 2030. But of course, we have to see that the Western Balkans growth plan is also one of the indicators of this gradual integration, because the Western Balkan countries, they will have gradual access to the EU single market, and in this respect, they will have tangible benefits.
Yes, about this, before we move on, you're referring to the growth plan. That's a 6 billion euro policy. It was put forward to help Western Balkan countries on their path to accession, which was first announced in last year's enlargement package. What do you make of the first months of this new plan?
It's a bit premature now to discuss the results because this plan is in the process of entering in force, and von der Leyen just came back from the region, and this plan is in the process. And of course, we should recall that there is a principle of reversibility. That means that if the countries receiving the funds, they want respect to the fundamentals of the EU, that is rule of law and human rights, the funds will be taken away. But of course, there is a criticism, that Western Balkan countries, they need more money, that 6 billion is not really enough compared also to the 2020 package that was, 30 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And also one of the major criticism of this plan, and I tend to agree to that, is a lack of political element. And I explain what do I mean here, because as you know, the countries of the Western Balkans, they are experiencing political disputes, territorial disputes, and this will be and is an obstacle of these countries to enter in the European Union. So to a certain extent, discussion should be also how this growth plan address these challenges. Another problem, and this is something that is well known, that the Western Balkan economic convergence is very much lower compared to the European Union. So this is not a panacea. So the growth plan will not be a guarantor of Western Balkans integration to the European Union, but it's an important step, and it depends also on the reforms of the countries and the reform agendas that are adopted.
And speaking of political recommendations, we cannot not mention the recent and contested elections in Georgia. The country's accession process has been frozen since the summer, and now that the party, Georgian Dream, is set to renew its term in office now for the fourth time, how will the contested election outcome shape EU-Georgia relations?
Unfortunately, I see a rather bleak picture for EU-Georgia relations because you're right, the elections, there are mounting concerns and alarming statements coming from many EU member states, but also from the EU's HRVP itself. And von der Leyen also mentioned that there is a need of a thorough investigation of the frauds. And I think this is indeed a wake-up call for Georgia and its European integration and its future. 80%, more than 80% of Georgians are in favor of the EU integration. And I think this is a kind of a dilemma and unexplained phenomena, how it's possible that in the country, which is so much pro-European, the voters decided to still give more than 50%, that is 54% for the Georgian Dream, who is well known for its anti-Western narrative, but also on policies. You mentioned the challenges for rule of law. This is first of all related to so-called Russian law that's unfortunately is adopted and is already operational, but also other laws that limit the minority rights, sexual minority rights, which overall impacts negatively on Georgia's human rights situation and fundamentals. So what is next on Georgia?
Yeah, it's hard to say what's next for Georgia, but I'm more interested in knowing what happened to Georgia, what happened to the country. It has been recommended candidate status, yet it's hardly true that concerns regarding rule of law arose only recently. So what prompted the country's recommendation in the first place?
Indeed, these recommendations were given before the country adopted these controversial laws. And also, we should not forget geopolitical context, right? So it was due to the war in Ukraine that the EU expressed its willingness to respect the desire of the Georgian citizens, majority of them who want to be members of the European Union. But what happened to Georgia is an interesting question. It's about money and politics, I have to say. It's about the ruler of Georgia, informal ruler, which is no longer an informal one, who is Bidzina Ivanishvili, who has his friendly not only ties but also business interests in Russia. And for the current Georgian Dream, who is unfortunately leaning the country towards Russia, is not ideal to have close relationships with the European Union, because being closer to the European Union means transparency, means electoral integrity, means high democratic standards. And I think that these are one of the reasons that unfortunately contributed to the declining of Georgia's European future. So now it is an important and historically turning point for my country, I have to say, because Georgia is now entering in a deep political crisis. As you know, the opposition refusing entering the parliament, and the president also is convinced that there has been a total fraud of the elections. Well, I believe it is important that international organizations, and with the support of the EU, and I'm aware that there is no precedent per se for that, but we need an international mediation and assistance to detect the scale of this fraud, and hopefully the ways are found so that country is brought back to the European path.
Mm-hmm. I want to turn to Moldova now, where elections were held to enshrine EU accession in the country's constitution. Results were favorable, even if by a very narrow margin. Is that a positive sign for the EC, and do you think we will see that reflected in the package?
Overall, I think that this is a mere fact, and this fact needs to be acknowledged, that Moldova as a country remains a divided nation when it comes to the EU integration. And we can discuss, of course, about the reasons and about this rather well-known reasons why we got this result that we got, that there has been a clear interference of Russian propaganda. Not only propaganda, but also financial resources has been used for the vote buying and pressure, etc. So these are well-known, right? However, compared to Georgia, there is no overwhelming support of the EU integration. Therefore, I think the EU needs to acknowledge this. I'm not sure to what extent it's very strategic for the Moldovan leadership to put the EU integration in their constitution, because, again, there is a clear signal from the population that on that there is no an overwhelming majority. But the enlargement package, I believe, will acknowledge, of course, this fact. However, thanks to the positive track record of Moldova's government and its pro-European stance, but also of their positive track records of their reform agenda, I'm expecting rather positive assessment of the European Commission towards Moldova.
Last year, Montenegro and North Macedonia received the most positive assessments of all. They were the true headliners. However, things have changed with North Macedonia's talks lagging due to feuds with neighboring countries. What are this year's most promising candidates, according to the European Commission, if you had to bet your money?
I think I would bet my money on Montenegro, and the reason is the very much determined and committed political leadership who puts the country's EU integration on a top political priority. But it's not only about politics and leadership; it's also their track record of implementation of the reforms that are demanded by the European Commission. When it comes to the North Macedonia, I think that's one of the obstacles, and it is also something that we should expect the enlargement package to acknowledge, is a minority rights that needs to be written in the constitution. But the president, as you know, is refusing this, with the condition that the implementation would be only be guaranteed after countries' accession in the European Union. So there is a mixed picture in the Western Balkan countries. However, overall, I expect that the assessment will be positive, especially towards Montenegro, but also North Macedonia and Albania.
And addressing the elephant in the room, the whole reason why the EU has been feeling pressure onto its enlargement policy is due to the invasion of Ukraine. It's only natural we go back to talking about Ukraine. The European Commission started negotiations with Kiev on the basis that a series of legal reforms, including corruption accountability, be implemented by the government. There has been a series of government scandals involving officials due to corruption in the country. Do you think that we can expect a tougher stance on Kiev, or the political situation is too, in a way, tricky to really address that right now?
I agree with you that due to the political situation, but due to the fact that the country is at war now, I think that criteria will be different vis-a-vis Ukraine. And of course, it's also difficult to request the same standards of reform implementation to a country that is at the same time fighting this aggressive war with aggressor Russia. However, I think that the European Commission will nevertheless positively assess a certain number of the reforms that has been demanded to Ukraine. However, again, my thinking is that it's important that there is a clarity about the situation in Ukraine.
I guess we'll have to wait for the document.
Indeed.
Thank you, Teona. I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our newsletters, And if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. Don't forget to leave us a star review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This podcast was produced by Miriam Sainz de Tejada, Charles Cohen, and I. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.